In and out of foster homes since the age of 4, Camilla Gamet had a tough life.
She was what we call a throwaway kid.
Marcel Hill also had a difficult life.
He's a guy who didn't have a lot going for him.
But he didn't let that hold him back.
He was really trying hard.
And when they met, it looked as if things were finally looking up for both of them.
She loved Marcel.
He genuinely loved her. When she came into his life, she filled that empty void that he had.
But in less than a year, Marcel would be dead.
He was literally in a pool of his own blood.
Camilla's behavior raised red flags.
We have a situation that looks like you cold-bloodedly murdered somebody.
Or was it, as Camilla claimed, a bit more complicated?
I heard, bitch, I'm going to kill you.
And for want of a better term, she snapped.
Jackson, Michigan, May 18th, 2013. It was around 3 o'clock on Saturday morning in this blue-collar town an hour west of Detroit.
It's a working-class community. Like some other Michigan cities, it's struggled a bit economically.
It also struggled with crime. And at exactly 3:07 that morning, the city's 911 center received a call from a young woman.
There's a man who's hurt. He's bleeding a lot. Please just come back.
Just why he was bleeding, the young woman wouldn't say.
Please send the ambulance now.
And when the dispatcher asked for more information about the man's injuries, the young woman suddenly hung up the phone.
Ma'am.
Unsure what was going on, the dispatcher routed police and EMS units to the address the woman had given, a house in a rundown neighborhood on the city's northwest side.
It's a multi-family residence. It's an old home that's been made into several smaller apartments.
Barely a minute later, the emergency personnel were still on their way when the young woman dialed 911 again.
Are you sending the ambulance tonight? Everybody's already on the way.
Once informed that an ambulance was on the way, the young woman hung up a second time. Moments later, the police and EMTs arrived at the scene.
There was an upstairs apartment and the front door was open to that apartment. At that point, we started to search the apartment.
Inside, they found the cramped apartment a shambles.
It looked like there had been a struggle inside there.
Blood on the walls, blood on the ceiling, blood on the rug.
There was no sign of the caller, but in the center of the main room, the police did find the source of the blood, the man that she had appeared so concerned about.
He was laying on a deflated air mattress. You could see blood around him. You see that he wasn't moving. He obviously was not breathing.
In fact, he was dead.
He had a large wound on his forehead.
They checked vital signs and determined that he was deceased.
Although the caller apparently didn't know that. Some 20 minutes after her first call, she was back on the line, checking in with 911 once again.
Can you just tell me if they're taking him to the hospital, please?
The dispatcher didn't exactly answer her question.
Ma'am, the police have made contact over there, but they need to talk to you now.
And then she had a pointed question for the caller.
Where are you?
In response, the young woman on the phone hung up one final time. But while the caller may have run, the apartment offered a possible clue to her identity and the dead man's. The mailbox outside the door listed two names, Marcel Hill and Camilla Gamet. Born in 1983, Michigan native Camilla Gamet had 3 sisters and 3 brothers, and a family in crisis.
Their mother had some substance abuse issues.
And so did their father.
He drank a lot and abused cocaine.
He also abused Camilla's mother, and as a result, she took the kids and left him.
She ran from him and took us down to Iowa.
But while Camilla's mother managed to end one abusive relationship, drugs proved harder to get away from. And when Camilla was only 4 years old, she and her siblings were taken away from their mother and placed in foster homes.
2 of my sisters went to one foster home and the rest of us was all split up.
Camilla didn't stay in that foster home for long, though. Over the next 12 years, she bounced from one foster home or institution to the next.
She was what we call a throwaway kid. Nobody wanted her.
And at age 16, she was on her own.
Iowa releases you out of the system at that point.
For the next few years, Camilla scraped by, living off minimum wage jobs and government checks.
Camilla Gamet is a survivor.
She even managed to get her GED.
Camilla was a pretty smart gal. I think had some potential.
But there was always one thing holding her back: her relationships with men.
She chose the same type of man her mother did.
Alcoholic, unstable, abusive.
Every man she chose beat her. When you grow up and you see your father beating your mother, you start to internalize that as being something normal, so you accept it in your relationships.
And by 2010, a series of bad relationships and bad decisions had left the 27-year-old struggling to raise 4 children.
She was scrambling and fighting, going hard.
So hard, in fact, that she eventually stopped trying.
She fell into drugs and alcohol abuse.
And much like her mother, the downward spiral had eventually caused Camilla her children.
She had 4 children taken from her.
It was a devastating blow for Camilla.
My sister was severely depressed.
And that sent her into an even deeper spiral, one that ended with a 2011 arrest for burglary.
She served a year in Marysville Correctional Facility.
However, as hard as that year in prison was, it appeared to be just the wake-up call that Camilla needed.
When she came out of prison, you know, having a vow that she would never be like her mother, she was going to be a better parent.
Once out of prison, Camilla decided to make a change, returning home to Michigan after a long absence.
She came to Jackson hoping to possibly start her life over again.
The plan was to get a job and then start petitioning the courts to get her children back.
So in the summer of 2012, Camilla went looking for work and found Marcel Hill. Eight years older than Camilla, Marcel also had a difficult childhood and a mother who struggled with addiction.
His family were of the opinion that he suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome. He had physical limitations and disabilities.
He had scoliosis or some problem with his back that he had suffered from since he was a child.
And as if that weren't enough,
he was about 8 or 9. He came down with meningitis.
His mother also died while he was only a child. But unlike Camilla, Marcel never ended up in foster care.
My sister was sick before she passed. She said to take care of her baby, and I promised her that I would. We were family, and we stood by each other.
Marcel's extended family did their best to give him a happy childhood.
He had friends that he hung out with. He had a girlfriend, and he was just a normal teenager.
Even if he was a little different.
He was in special ed classes throughout his education.
Despite his challenges, Marcel not only finished high school, he was also an athlete.
He wrestled on the wrestling team.
And after high school, he worked to support himself.
He'd worked at various fast food restaurants in the Jackson area.
He was really, really trying hard to do what he needed to do.
Although for Marcel, restaurant work wasn't just a means to an end, it was his dream.
He wanted very much to be a chef.
He would cook these big dinners on Sundays.
But despite his talents, Marcel's disabilities meant that his dream of being a full-fledged chef always eluded him.
He could only rise to the level of being maybe a short order chef or something of that nature.
And by 2012, even flipping burgers had become too much for Marcel to endure.
He had back pain that was chronic and disturbed him quite often.
Unable to work, Marcel depended on disability checks to get by.
Marcel had steady income, and he had that as a result of his disabilities through the state.
It was steady, but it wasn't much. Enough for food and a tiny apartment on Jackson's northwest side.
He's a guy who didn't have a lot going for him.
But he still had dreams.
Having a relationship, having a family.
Which explained the 37-year-old's excitement when he met Camilla in the summer of 2012.
He had kept calling me like, hey, cuz, I met this girl.
Camilla appeared equally excited about Marcel.
He made her feel good about herself as a woman, you know what I'm saying?
Soon, they were dating.
I was happy that, they were together. I was happy that she was making him happy. When she came into his life, she filled that empty void that he had.
And as it turned out, Marcel filled a definite void in Camilla's life, too.
She was getting money from the state of Michigan to do things like his laundry, get him groceries, run basic errands.
As a result of his disability, he also was provided money for a chore provider.
Meaning that Camilla had not only found a boyfriend, she'd found a job, too.
I think that probably made him that much more closer to her.
And by Valentine's Day 2013, the couple had become so close that Marcel was determined to prove his devotion.
He really loved her, he genuinely loved her.
Camilla and Marcel seemed to be building a nice life together. However, a little more than 3 months later, Marcel would be dead on the floor of their tiny apartment, and Camilla would be conspicuously missing. At a little after 3 o'clock on the morning of May 18, 2013, police in Jackson, Michigan responded to a frantic phone call from an apartment on the city's northwest side.
It was a call from a female expressing that a man was in apartment number 2 and that he was bleeding and that he needed help right away and to send an ambulance.
What happened to him?
I don't know. Please hurry.
Okay, ask him. Listen, ask him what happened.
He can't talk. Just come on, please.
No, listen, they're already on the way.
Police and EMTs were on the scene within minutes. And while there was no sign of the caller, they did find the injured man she had called about.
He was lying on a now deflated air mattress, literally in a pool of his own blood.
He wasn't just injured, though. He was dead.
There was wounds to his head, and there was blood all over his torso.
The names on the apartment mailbox provided the police with a tentative identity for both the dead man and the woman who had called 911, Marcel Hill and Camilla Gannett. But if Marcel was dead on the floor, where was Camilla? The police at the scene contacted dispatch and asked that they ping the cell phone that made the 911 call.
It's a triangulation type thing, and they can give us so many feet to where the cell phone was last used.
And the location the ping provided was surprisingly close.
It was about 25 feet from where we were at.
From the apartment, the police dashed downstairs to the backyard, the location of the ping.
The officers see this figure emerge from the shadows.
It was a woman, 30-year-old Camilla Gammett.
She was intoxicated, slurring her speech, kind of wobbling around as she was standing.
And when the officers came close enough to shine their flashlights on Camilla,
I did see a bloodstain on her white tennis shoe.
Unsure just how she had gotten the bloodstain, the officers at the scene didn't place Camilla under arrest.
She may be either a viable witness to the event or a potential suspect.
But they did ask her to come into the station and make a statement.
She was very cooperative, did not resist us at all.
Although considering how much she had apparently been drinking, there were limits to her cooperation. Taken downtown and momentarily left alone in the interrogation room, she promptly passed out.
She was drunk, very drunk.
She was actually laying on the floor,
leaving Camilla to sleep it off in the interrogation room. The investigators focused their efforts on the crime scene, where the coroner's crew was at work photographing Marcel's body prior to removal.
The victim had very significant blunt force injuries.
He also had a number of stab wounds.
So we had 2 potential causes of death for him.
And scattered around the room were numerous possible murder weapons. Everything from a frying pan.
It was very bloody.
To a heavy metal floor lamp.
Those metal pipes were bent and had blood on them.
And lastly, amid the broken dishes and glassware that littered the kitchen.
I looked and saw 2 knives on the floor in the kitchen area.
Meanwhile, not far from where the police apprehended Camilla, an officer recovered her cell phone.
He was able to locate the phone in the backyard.
Other investigators canvassed the nearby apartments for witnesses, and they found one sleepy woman who said she had heard a couple fighting.
At approximately 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, she could hear a woman screaming at a man.
She even recognized the voices, which was why she didn't call the police.
To her, it was just another fight between Marcel Hill and Camilla Gammett.
And according to their neighbor, that was nothing unusual.
All the neighbors in that house frequently witnessed these 2 arguing and fighting.
And since that pointed to Camilla as a more likely perpetrator than a witness, the police decided it was high time they talked to her.
I went back to the police department and checked on Miss Gammett. I learned she was just waking up.
Questioned by the investigators, Camilla denied calling 911. Instead, she claimed that it was a friend of hers named Ashley.
Her initial story was that she and Ashley had gone to the apartment together.
When we got over there, it was dark. The door was open. I went in there. We went in there. Marcel was laying there on the ground. She called the ambulance, and she panicked, and she left. And I tried to wake Marcel. He wasn't responding. I panicked, and I left. That's it.
And despite the fact that her name was on the mailbox, Camilla denied living in the apartment with Marcel.
I pointed out to her that had her name and Hill's name underneath it. She said, oh, he might have put that on there.
Can you explain to me what your relationship with him is about?
Just casual friends.
She also denied having a fight with Marcel that night, no matter what the neighbors had said.
Some people heard you guys arguing tonight. What was your argument about?
I don't know about the argument.
And when the detective told her that Marcel was dead, Camilla went into even deeper denial.
They tried to CPR or nothing.
It won't work. He's dead.
How do you know it won't work? If you saw him, how do you know he was dead? That's what I'm asking you.
I know dead. He's dead.
As the realization that Marcel was gone slowly sank in, it appeared to send Camilla over the edge into despair.
She continued to get more and more upset, demanding to go to the scene.
Well, I'm sorry, that's just not possible. But what I want to understand is is he your boyfriend?
No. Just so they care about that. I'm never gonna see him again.
As devastating as the news of Marcel's death was, worse was coming. In the interrogation room, the investigators made it clear that they considered Camilla responsible.
What I'm worried about here is that we have a situation that looks like you cold-bloodedly murdered somebody.
However, the investigator also offered Camilla what appeared to be a way out.
I don't think you intended to kill him at all, Camilla. I know it. But I need to understand this. Okay? I need you to be honest about what happened. Alright?
Camilla refused to take the bait.
I don't have a lawyer. So if I talk to you next day, I know you're going to be hitting me with some serious charge.
Her request for an attorney ended the interview, but the fact that Camilla had refused to talk didn't stop the investigators from hitting her with the most serious charge of all.
I told her that she was under arrest for the charge of murder.
And that, once the investigators stepped out of the room, sent Camilla completely out of control. Early on the morning of May 18th, 2013, 30-year-old Camilla Gamet was in a police interrogation room in Jackson, Michigan. She had just been placed under arrest for the murder of Marcel Hill, who'd been found beaten and stabbed to death in their apartment.
She told me that she did not live there, that she had actually gone there because Marcel was a friend of hers, and she discovered him and then she left.
And she didn't take the news of Marcel's death or her arrest well at all.
She literally tears apart the interview room.
At that point, I determined that it was necessary to intervene.
Stand up, Camilla.
After placing Camilla into a holding cell, the investigators returned to the crime scene to do follow-up interviews with the neighbors. And when they did, the woman who said she'd heard Camilla and Marcel fighting the night before had something to add to her story.
She took me to her apartment and explained that she was looking out of her apartment window, which allowed her to look into the windows of the kitchen in Marcel Hill and Camilla Gamet's apartment.
According to the woman, what she'd seen was Camilla throwing things at Marcel.
Glasses, dishes, everything was being thrown at him.
And the woman claimed that Marcel hadn't been fighting back.
He was cowered down and saying, "Stop hitting me, stop hitting me."
According to the neighbor, the fight had eventually moved out of the kitchen.
She could still hear screaming.
And then, at around 3 o'clock in the morning, not long before Camilla had called the police seeking aid for Marcel, the fight had suddenly, ominously, stopped.
In her words, it went dead silent.
Granted, the neighbor hadn't called the police, but it wasn't terribly surprising given the area. A rundown collection of old houses cut up into small apartments like the one Marcel had rented.
Many of the people that live in and around this particular building don't like to cooperate with the police.
Camilla, however, had plenty of past interaction with the police. When the investigators pulled her records, they not only found the burglary arrest that had sent her to prison, they found that she had been charged with several violent crimes, too.
She had had some domestic violence and even child abuse charges.
One of the domestic assault charges and the child abuse charge had stemmed from the same bizarre incident. In 2007, during a fight with her old boyfriend, Camilla had thrown a child's car seat at him, with the child still inside it.
She actually had used the child as a weapon.
Those charges had been dropped, but Camilla also had a more recent domestic assault charge on her record, one that involved Marcel. When the investigators spoke to Marcel's family, they backed up what the neighbors had said. Not only did Camilla and Marcel get in frequent fights, they said that he had the scars to show for it. According to the family, it was in February of 2013 when they first noticed a shallow cut on his torso, crudely stitched up with black thread.
I said, what happened? He said, she cut me and she sewed it up herself. And he's laughing like, that's serious.
But then, about a month later,
Marcel went to the hospital for another stab wound. This time it actually punctured his lung.
Although according to Marcel, it was an accident.
Mr. Hill told the medical professionals what I think of as perhaps the most classic domestic violence explanation that exists, which is, I fell down the stairs.
He and Camilla both told the hospital staff that he had fallen on a nail.
But there was no explaining away what happened barely a week later on March 8th.
I was at my mother's house and I was sleeping. There was just this loud boom, boom, boom.
It was Marcel pounding on the door, and when his cousin let him in,
he had blood all on his shirt.
Marcel told his cousin that Camilla had been drinking, that they'd gotten into an argument, and then
she hit him in the head with a hammer.
Half blinded by blood, Marcel had run, gotten on his bike, and ridden to his cousin's, who called the police.
My cousin was furious.
Apparently, Camilla hadn't been all that upset, though. When the police found her, she had been passed out, drunk.
She was laying on the bed on bloody sheets with a hammer laying next to her.
Camilla had been arrested and charged with assault, but once she was in jail, Marcel had missed her.
Marcel was very sad that she was gone from his life.
He was like, I love her. She needs me.
Marcel's family tried to warn him.
It didn't make sense to any of them. They urged him repeatedly to get away from her.
I said, Marcel, she gonna kill you.
But Marcel wouldn't listen or press charges.
Ultimately, the prosecutor's office was left with no choice, and they had to dismiss the charges against Camilla because Marcel didn't cooperate.
On May 9th, Camilla had been released from jail.
He told family members that he had loved her and he didn't want her to be in trouble.
It takes about 7 times for the victim to finally leave their abuser. 7 times of trying before they actually leave.
Marcel never got the chance, though. 9 days after Camilla's release, he was dead. But this time, there was no way the prosecutors would drop the charges. And Camilla's court-appointed attorney was so sure she would be convicted that he was ready to cut a deal.
I went to the prosecutor and talked about a plea agreement, and finally I was able to persuade the chief assistant to offer me a second-degree murder plea.
But when he presented the offer to Camilla,
she turned it down.
Camilla was ready to admit that she'd killed Marcel, but she insisted she'd done it in self-defense.
She said, I did it, but I did it because I was afraid for my life.
But could she prove it? As it turned out, Marcel had a record, too.
He'd been in prison a few times. He'd had a little bit of a criminal past.
Several of the arrests were drug-related.
He was selling street drugs.
And if that wasn't enough to turn a jury against him, there was one more charge on his rap sheet.
He was a registered sex offender, tier 3, worst of the worst. That's why he was in prison.
What's more, Camilla denied ever abusing Marcel. Instead, Camilla claimed that she'd been the victim of his abuse.
He was doing that stuff to her the whole time.
And the incidents she'd been charged with, according to her brother, in reality, those had all been self-defense.
She didn't start hitting him back until like the last 3-4 months.
In fact, Camilla's brother claimed that she'd only started fighting back at his urging, including the incident with the hammer that had led to her arrest for assault.
She called me and she said he hated me. He punching me like I'm a man. I said, pick something up and hit him in his head.
But claims of abuse, coupled with Marcel's criminal history, put the prosecution at a disadvantage.
Typically, in our society, we see the men as the abuser. And so that's always a risk that we would run.
One thing was certain. As her trial date approached, Camilla and her brother were counting on it for an acquittal.
I said, you got to just go tell the truth. He attacked you, you stop.
On February 24th, 2014, Camilla Gamet went on trial in Jackson County, Michigan Circuit Court for the murder of her boyfriend, Marcel Hill, who'd been stabbed and beaten to death in May of 2013.
11 times he was stabbed. And some of those stab wounds were significant enough to cause death. Also, he was struck severely about the head.
The 31-year-old had been charged with open murder, meaning that it was up to the jury to determine the exact degree of the offense.
We had the option of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or self-defense.
Although, in their opening statement, the prosecution made it clear that they didn't believe Camilla's claim of self-defense.
I know you will have no difficulty determining who was the aggressor in this incident and who alone was the victim.
In fact, given her tragic childhood and his physical and mental disabilities, the prosecutors argued that Marcel Hill had been a victim all his life.
He died, quite frankly, the same way he lived his life. Discarded like garbage, a throwaway child.
In its open, the defense stood by Camilla's claim of self-defense, but they also added something new.
It was self-defense, but she didn't know who the attacker was.
And according to the defense, she hadn't realized that her attacker was Marcel until it was far too late.
The room was pitch dark. She had been heavily using drugs and alcohol.
However, according to the defense, it wasn't just the drugs and alcohol that had caused Camilla to lash out blindly and violently. They claimed that her own tragic, traumatic history played a part, too.
She has been abused over and over and over again. And she reacted. She lashed out, fear, panic, and did things that probably were targeted at a lot of men that had beaten the dickens out of her for most of her adult life.
And once she had started fighting back, the defense claimed that it had been hard for Camilla to stop.
She just kept flailing out. I mean, for want of a better term, she snapped.
When the prosecution started presenting its case, they used another word to describe Camilla's actions that night: overkill.
The medical examiner did say that there were so many different ones, it was hard to determine which one exactly killed him.
And to back up the medical examiner's testimony, the prosecutors filled the evidence table with weapons that Camilla had used on Marcel.
Pieces of lamps, end tables, and a knife that all had his blood on it.
I don't know if we will ever know everything that she hit him with.
And the evidence was nearly overwhelming.
There was a frying pan that was just incredible to see. The indention, the head was on the frying pan.
Based on a testimony from the investigators, that night wasn't the first time Camilla had supposedly attacked Marcel.
She had hit him in the head with a hammer.
She had allegedly stabbed him before, too, at least twice.
Ms. Gamet stabbed Marcel for the first time that we know of in February of 2013.
And according to the prosecution, all those previous incidents meant there was nothing about Marcel's death that suggested self-defense.
That all adds up to the defendant being the abuser.
When it was their turn, the defense was ready to argue that it was Marcel who'd been abusive and that he'd had a police record.
He wasn't quite the innocent person that was portrayed at the trial.
However, by arguing that Camilla hadn't known that the man she supposedly fought off was Marcel, the defense may have made a colossal blunder, one that the prosecutors were quick to pick up on.
Therefore, anything that he has done to her allegedly in the past is completely irrelevant.
And according to the prosecutors, that included the fact that Marcel was a registered sex offender.
Any and all references to specific acts of any kind of the victim are inadmissible, including domestic violence perpetrated on her.
In a stunning blow for the defense, the judge agreed with the prosecution, ruling all testimony about Marcel's record and his alleged abuse off limits.
I said, well, you know, if you telling only one side of the story, I said, well, what the jury going to deliberate on?
So when it came time to make her case, there was only one thing the defense could do: put Camilla on the witness stand.
You can't let him just sit in there and lie on you.
When she took the stand, Camilla started out with a heartbreaking account of her childhood.
My mother was in a domestic violence relationship, and she lost custody of us, so we ended up in foster care.
And according to Camilla's allegation, her time in foster care wasn't an improvement.
My foster father was raping me and my sister.
As a result, according to Camilla, she'd been diagnosed with a variety of psychological disorders.
I recall was post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, bipolar with manic, ADHD, ADD, antisocial personality disorder, and insomnia and anxiety.
And given the many problems that both she and Marcel struggled with.
Your relationship was rocky. Is that correct?
That's true. Yes.
Camilla told the jury that they frequently fought, especially when Marcel had been drinking.
Why did you stay with him?
I loved him, and I thought that I could help him.
And according to Camilla, she had never meant to kill him. She told the jury that she had been sound asleep, passed out after a night of drinking, when someone suddenly attacked her.
I remember waking up to the sound of glass shattering over my head.
She said she didn't know who it was because the room was completely black.
At one point, I heard, "Bitch, I'm going to kill you."
Did you recognize that voice?
No, I was scared.
Terrified, Camilla said she had done the only thing she could.
She just started, grabbing what she could to fight off her attacker.
And she struck out until the attack stopped.
According to Camilla, it was only then that she had been able to turn on a light and determine just who had attacked her.
I feel terrible about what happened. I did not mean for this to happen.
And then, when Camilla realized just what she had done,
she panicked and went into full flight mode. Let's get away from this horrible situation.
Although, as the defense pointed out, Camilla could have just run away and left Marcel to die. But she didn't.
And why did you call 911?
Because I realized that something serious had happened, and after I saw that it was him, I wanted them to help him.
But it was too late, a fact that Camilla claimed to regret.
Now, how did you feel when Detective Shitty told you he was dead?
I was heartbroken.
And she talked about how she loved Marcel.
But was her tragic story convincing?
She held up well.
Better than I might have expected.
So well, in fact, that when the case went to the jury, the prosecution was worried.
Was I concerned that a jury might believe what she has to say? Yes.
On March 5th, 2014, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury announced it had reached a verdict in the murder trial of Camilla Gamet. The 31-year-old was charged with killing her boyfriend Marcel Hill, a developmentally challenged man with a troubled past.
He was a registered sex offender.
At trial, the jury hadn't heard anything about Marcel's record, but they had heard all about Camilla's troubled past and her supposed love for Marcel.
I remember seeing at least one of them crying.
Would her sad story be enough to sway the jury?
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Camilla Tiffany Gamet, as to count 1 open murder, guilty.
The jury convicted her of first-degree murder.
At her sentencing hearing on April 16, Camilla continued to maintain that she had acted in self-defense.
I was convicted off of lies.
And then, when Marcel's aunt read an emotional statement from his family,
I remember the cries of help that he screamed as you plunged that knife in and out of his body.
Camilla stunned the courtroom by interrupting her.
She turned to her and was very snotty and asked her if she was finished yet.
Aren't you done yet? And I couldn't believe she just said that.
Camilla's outburst drew an angry response from the judge.
You're gonna shut your mouth or I'm gonna have some duct tape put on.
Well, yes,
all right. We'll wait here for a moment until we can get her quiet.
The threat was enough. Camilla remained quiet, even without the tape. But the judge was just getting started.
He said this was one of the most cold-hearted murders I've ever seen.
You stab, you stab, you stab. You stabbed until he was dead.
And then he sentenced Camilla to life in prison.
He was very angry. He told her he hoped she died in prison.
If this was a death penalty state, you'd be getting the chair.
The judge wasn't the only one who felt that way either.
I wish we had the death penalty. Because that would have been proper for her, too. She was a monster. She was just a monster.
Although, if she was a monster, her brother maintains that it was Camilla's hard life that made her that way.
When a person feels powerless, they're going to try to do something to make them feel powerful. And a lot of times, acting out anger is a very powerful feeling. Even though it's destructive, it's still powerful.
Amazing. I love this.